Get ready to tune into stories of average men striving for greatness, to become the leaders that are needed in their homes, in their career, and their communities. This is the Brotherhood of Fatherhood podcast.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Brotherhood of Fatherhood podcast. I'm super duper pumped, like always, to have a chat with my guest, Jarrod Dumas. Jarrod is a father, of course. But what's really cool about Jarrod is he's a relationship coach. He helps couples stay together. And basically, he wants to help men better communicate their needs, I would guess better serve their wives, and basically save marriages, which if you've listened to me at all, you know is a really big passion of mine. So can't wait to have that conversation with Jarrod. But first, I want to make sure if you're listening to this podcast, you're plugged into the Brotherhood of Fatherhood Facebook group. Even if you're not a Facebooker, go there, fill out the form and put your email in. And I know, oh gosh, we're going to get a ton of emails. I haven't sent one email to my list yet, but we have some huge, and I mean huge, things coming up in June. Like seriously. And it's going to be capped out to only 30 or 40 men. So you want to be on my email list. This is something that like I cannot believe is coming together. And I'm not going to spill the beans yet, but it is ridiculously epic. So if you want to cap the middle of your year 2022 with an epic experience with men, notable men, and learn and raise the roof on your ability to serve and be all that you can be, make sure you get on that list. Of course, I'd love for you to engage on the Facebook group. The other thing that I want to talk about is this kick-ass sign behind me. Oops, right there. I have several of them because I have several podcasts, but this one, the Brotherhood of Fatherhood podcast sign, was created by my friends at Constructive Solutions ENT. And you can find them on Instagram. Everybody uses Instagram. So it's Constructive Solutions ENT, one word, look them up. I've had multiple signs for friends made by them. They turn out epic. If you're a podcaster or a coach or anything where you have visuals, you got a brand, and this is a great way to do it. So shout out to my friends at Constructive Solutions ENT Enterprises. And welcome to the show, Jarrod.
Thank you very much. How are you doing today?
I'm fabulous. It's a get stuff done day, and those are really fun days for me. So how about you?
Yeah, same. Trying to get caught up on everything, keep things moving, So
yeah.
And I'm really excited to be chatting with you. So thanks for the opportunity.
Well, you're welcome, but thank you. We really try and give our listeners a lot of tools, and I'm really looking forward to talking to you about divorce, your experience through that, which is probably never a fun story to tell. And then kind of get into why you're passionate about people not getting divorced if it's possible. But, I would be remiss to just jump straight into that without asking you a little bit about your story. You have a daughter, you help raise some stepkids. But where did this whole journey begin where you wanted to help people save their marriage?
I think it started a lot. So I've always been a people person. People is my superpower. I've learned over the course of my life that I'm very empathic and I'm very intuitive, and I'm tapped into people's emotions on a lot of different levels. I worked in public schools for a long time and spent a lot of time around kids and figured out that I could really understand them and what they needed. I could ask them a couple questions and I could just feel where they're coming from. And I thought for a long time it had to do with working with hundreds and then thousands of them over the years. But I've really come to understand, like, it's just part of who I am, and I think that you can look at the spiritual side of it, where that comes from. I think there's also, when you grow up with certain experiences, you become really tuned into people's energy because it's part of how you keep yourself safe and part of how you stay out ahead of some of the things that aren't awesome. So, as I've been going through life and I've had a lot of opportunities to navigate what my future looks like, and where I want to go with my life, I feel all of these different experiences have kind of come together. And so I get people, I've, as you mentioned, been through divorce, which was one of the hardest things that's ever happened in my life. And also one of the greatest things that's ever happened to me in its own way. But I also recognize that for a lot of people, there is pain there, and there's great things that they can do to keep things going the way that they want it to, and avoid all of that. So for me, it's just been about recognizing that helping people is part of who I am. And I have this wealth of knowledge and experience that, whether I ask for it or not, has kind of come into my life, and I want to share what I know. There's a shamanic element to it of helping people, being that wounded healer, and like taking what I've learned and passing it forward, because it's part of, we're all being invited to kind of grow and have a better experience. And I think we can see, especially in this time in the world, where like so much is changing so fast. And one of the things that's happened is people's relationships, they've really called their relationships into question, and they have questions, like they're questioning why they've done things the way they have, which is a beautiful thing. And as old systems are kind of breaking down, people have a chance to kind of reinvent like their relationship with themselves, their relationship with their spouses. And like, I just love the idea of being part of helping people find the words to speak their truth to their partners, to know what their own needs are, especially men, because we've never really been invited. A lot of us have never been invited to understand how we feel, why we feel that way, how to speak it. There's just so much that is really powerful for me, and all of that. And the idea of creating gold out of my wounds, right? Like I went through this traumatic experience with my marriage ending, and now I've got knowledge that I can share with people to help make meaning of it on a whole other level. It's just part of what really lights me up. So
that's awesome. You mentioned education, and I'm definitely, have that background, 13 years in public education in middle school. And in a middle school, I don't know what level you do, but in a middle school, you really have to be, if you're going to be impactful, you have to be empathetic, and you have to be able to read into really what's going on, not what just on the front. And I kind of felt like that was a superpower of mine. And it's really interesting because as I find some other men like Dennis Meralda and some other men that have been in the education background, and they're moving into this space where they want to make an impact with men. And part of the superpower bringing to that is the fact that we can see really what's going on when there's so many fronts. I mean, honestly, I would say a lot of men are operating in a way that a middle schooler or a kid in school operates.
So it's beautiful that you say that, and I would agree 100%. So, because there is an opportunity. So back up and go to your point about middle schoolers. So what I see with kids and what I see with teachers, and I say this for respect because I've been there as well, like, so get those phone calls around like, hey, I've got this kid and he's sleeping in my classroom, or, he's acting out and I need you to deal with it. And so, yeah, there's a behavior there. And I've kind of evolved to the point, working with so many kids over the years and doing some of this men's work and doing some of the initiatic work and doing my own shadow work, like when I hear these stories of these kids are misbehaving, all I see is their shadow, right? A kid who's acting out in class is craving connection, and what's really interesting is then you go to the next level, and not only do you see the shadow of the student, but you start to see the shadow of the teacher, right? What is it about a 15-year-old, calling you out that is rocking you to your core that you need to get me on the phone to come help you with that, right? And so one of the things I've tried to bring into my work, in education, was this idea that, hey, we can fill our own cups before we ask our students to fill our cups for us. And I think a lot, if you want to talk teachers for a second, I was a teacher for 10 years, been in assistant principal role for the last 7. And one of the things I learned through my own education as a teacher, learning from my kids is, a lot of us who end up in teaching, we go to school, we end up in teaching because school is a safe place for us, and it was where we excelled. For a lot of us, school is kind of like this safe place where we are either academically inclined or, we connect with the adults there. So it's natural that we kind of want to stay in school. It was a great place for us. And I see with a lot of folks, we get into teaching and we want the kids to have the same experience that we had. We want to be that adult that lights them up. And part of it is subconsciously wanting to meet our own needs for significance, and so when there's a kid that doesn't act in the way that we want, it makes us question our own value, and we kind of almost need to kind of like stomp that out, whereas if we do our own work, our inner work, and we're good and we're embodied and we're integrated, then we fill our own cup. Then we can see that kid who's sleeping or that kid who's acting out, and we can recognize them for who they are, which is a little kid who needs love and needs caring from an adult. And that's where, I go right off the rails, because then, the math, the English, the writing, it is important. And it's also not necessarily as important as building connection and teaching kids how to see themselves and where they're going and how to get their own emotional needs met. A lot of kids have great, healthy relationships at home, and a lot don't. And the real work, I think, of education could be supporting those students who need to learn how to be adults that can thrive and not continue to have these abandonment wounds and these attachment wounds and these traumas that they don't heal because they don't even know it's a thing.
That's interesting. I think that maybe that's why I don't want to make this about me, but I do want to talk a little bit about this. Why I was a, round peg in a square hole of the school system. I did not have a good experience in elementary or middle school. It was actually horrifying for me. And when I go back into my history and really look at some of the things that created patterns in my life that were destructive, self-destructive, they came from the way I developed those stories in my head and the experiences I had with teachers who just weren't good. And perhaps that's why when I was an educator, I was able to connect so well with the kids that didn't fit the mold. I feel like I was able to connect with all types of kids, and that's where my success laid. But I'm curious, were you really successful in school and it was a safe place for you?
School is really interesting for me. And real quick, I'm wondering, like, did you have like even one teacher that really like got you or supported you? Or were you really never feel like you had that connection?
I had, the first time someone believed in me was my 8th grade year in middle school. And it was a group of teachers. It was a team teacher classroom. And they really just saw potential. And then they lifted me up. And then high school was just a wash.
Yeah.
So I basically,
high school is brutal.
Yeah. Basically, I just had this one experience. And perhaps it did have a very profound effect on, I look back on it and I'm like, yeah, I felt that was the place I felt success. So, and
that's the other side of the coin. I always said there were kind of like two groups of teachers, either ones who really excelled in school or some whose school was not great, but there was at least one person that really got them and supported them. And they wanted to be that for other people. It sounds like maybe you fell into that, but going back to me for school, school was absolutely totally my jam. And I can remember from a very early age when my parents would talk about me to friends and to family, they would always talk about how smart Jarrod was, and how good he was in school. And so for me, that became at least, right up through 8th grade. I was right at the top of the pile in terms of grades. And I was always doing my best to do as good at school as I could. It was both to get praise and also to avoid criticism. Because even by then I had already developed the people pleaser techniques and the good boy energy and the, wanting to make people happy and also avoid the inner critic that I had already learned how to tap into to do virtually everything. And honestly, it wasn't even until it was pretty much this year, I'm 43, and I really in the last year kind of understood how school academics had always been this area where I was filling my cup and I was feeling significant and pushing myself because that was how I was a good person. And as I began to unlock the idea, finally, that I'm a good person either way, my desire to be in graduate class after graduate class after graduate class just completely fell away. Because I recognized it was me trying to convince myself that I was important or good at something. And as I've really, and I was like, for me, the work is constantly ongoing. I'm not complete. but as I open up to this idea that, you have value as a human being and you are a good person, whether you're taking classes or not, it's like, wow, I really don't need to be doing that. I wasn't doing it for the reasons I thought I was. And now that I'm starting to understand this about myself, I can go in a different direction and use that time for other creative pursuits that are more in alignment with who I am now. Instead of reliving that old story of who I was and always have been up until this point.
So many men, and I'm hearing it in you, and I went through this, and most of the guests I've had have been through this, live a good portion of their beginning of their professional life, and even sometimes, actually a lot of times younger, with a misplaced identity. We place our identity with performance. We place our identity with what we do. We place our identity with status, like where we're getting. And it's so anti-productive to growth. And what I've found over and over again is that as soon as that identity is really kind of switched to not how we perform or not what it is we do, but really in who we are, and that things really just start to take a completely different trajectory. I'm curious, when was that moment for you? And was it while you were in your marriage, after your marriage, during the divorce, which I'm sure was just a cakewalk?
Yeah, it was definitely after. It was definitely after my divorce. I think that my divorce was difficult, and it was in itself an initiation that I realized at some level I had to go through in my life. Before my divorce, I think about different levels of consciousness, and up and through my divorce, I was a complete and total victim in my life. I lived in total victim consciousness, right? Everything was always happening to me. I was not embodied as a man at all. I did not lead my marriage. I did not lead my life. I lived kind of in this, good boy prison I'd built for myself of like, I need to make my parents happy. I talk about this in some of my videos I posted. Like, I spent most of my life right up through my 30s trying to make my parents happy. And when I was married, I transferred that need to please to my wife. And it wasn't fair to me. It wasn't fair to her, certainly. And I see that now, but I had to go through my divorce, and I had to even go through a post-divorce relationship or two to like recognize that these patterns are still happening. These things are still happening. And this crazy idea of like, I'm going to keep having these experiences. And so it's not about the people. It's not, here's a crazy idea. Maybe it's not about the people that I keep choosing to bring into my life, doing things to me. Maybe it's something about me that I need to fix. I was probably about 38 years old when that started to sink in finally, 38, 39. And then I went through this really fun phase of being in that manifestor energy, right? Like, I'm going to control everything and I'm going to fix everything. And for me, that showed up through fitness. I used to be very out of shape, very overweight. And I spent about 3 years of getting in really good shape. But that was like the push energy, the striving, and I was able to make that happen. But even that isn't the solution in the end, because you've gone from a place of just being completely, going from being in a place of, I have no idea what's going to happen, I don't have control over anything, to I'm going to control everything and it's going to turn out the way I want, except you don't have control over everything.
Right.
But I would say for me that really started to happen a couple of years after my divorce, when I started to see some of the benefits of being able to take control, set goals, actually talk about and think about about the time you're setting goals, you're starting to ask yourself, well, what's my goal, right? What do I actually want to do? Where do I actually want to be? You have to start having some success with taking steps towards something before you even dare open up your heart to the idea that I might actually be able to do the things I want to do.
Yeah.
And when you start to think like that, then you start to say, well, what's possible? And when you start thinking about what's possible, then you start to really broaden your horizons. And I think like education for me, working in public school, there's a beautiful, there's a safety net there. There's also a pretty hard ceiling. You and I talked about that. And so as you start to see your potential as a human being, you want to move the ceiling out of the way, because you start to focus less on, well, at least I've got this really nice safety net here. And you start to believe in yourself more, and you're less worried about falling down, and you start to become more worried about the limits on what is possible. And then you start to really expand your horizons, and you start to look at the box you kind of put yourself in, and you start to say, how do I start to move out of this box and into something much bigger? Because there's really no danger, in being who I am. In fact, the pain starts to shift, and like people like Tony Robbins talk about this, that when you start to make changes in your life is when you recognize there's more pain associated with staying where you are than there is with going for what you want.
Yeah, that's such a typical, and thank you for that. There were so many nuggets in there. So like, if you're listening, go like rewind like 2-3 minutes and just listen to that and break that down, because there was so many pieces that are what I've seen is really pivotal in men specific. I'm going to speak to men because that's who I talk to a lot. In what was pivotal in their next step in life, where they really kind of started to stop living in a numb existence, or in just this place where this is the expected, it's safe. And really it's just garbage, but I don't want to restate it all. It's that last 2-3 minutes where there's so many nuggets in there. And I would challenge listeners, like if you're feeling like you're stuck or you haven't hit this place where a lot of the guests are talking about this growth that they've gone through, these places of self-actualization and really understanding who they are and breaking free. It's like, what is the formula? Well, go back and listen, because all of those things are part of the formula. So, man, I mean, there's a lot there. There's more too. Yeah. And I think that's a big part of the work, right? Is helping.
Yeah.
And something I'm super passionate about is identifying things where typical people get hung up. Like where are you hung up personally? Where are you hung up professionally? Where are you hung up with, we talk about the ceiling in education. Well, most people have put some sort of glass ceiling on them. Emotionally, they've put a glass ceiling on them.
Yes.
Physically, they put a glass ceiling on themselves. Obviously they like to think there's no glass ceiling, but really almost everybody has a ceiling in their work if they're employed. And that's a hard reality. It's a really hard reality.
It is hard reality. And, so part of the challenge is, you talked about like that place of going, letting go of all the stuff that's kind of garbage and allowing yourself to kind of be authentically who you are. And, so that's like stepping into that wild man energy where you know what you want, and you have to choose to, choose what you want over what is safe and what society wants. And even in a lot of cases, what your partner wants, what your wife wants, or what your husband wants. But like, the idea of needing to be authentically who you are first, and be able to say, and trust me, it is not a simple thing. I'm still working on it all the time in so many different areas, being able to say, this is who I am. And I know there will be wounds, and I know there will be consequences, and I know I'm going to pay a price for saying who I am. That price can be paid in terms of rejection by people that you care about. That's a big one for me because, when we talk about different archetypes, I'm very much in my lover archetype. At my core, that's kind of who I am as a lover. And like, what that means is I care about people. And so when you care about people and you derive a lot of value from how people respond to you, especially if you're empathic like I am, one of the most terrifying things is the idea that people would not continue to care for you. Because you put so much value on relationships. So there's a possibility that people are going to reject you outright. People are going to call you out. People are going to shame you. People are going to guilt you. People are going to be angry. You're going to stir up. When you change something, in terms of your work or in terms of your family, you end up changing things for other people too, right? Like if you're at a job and you decide, I don't want to be in this job anymore, you leave, you create a problem for your boss, you create a problem for your coworkers. So anytime you change anything, you're forcing other people to confront their own stuff. Right. And so the first thing they're going to do is they're going to most likely, well, I shouldn't say first thing they're going to do. There's a really good chance that unless they've really done a lot of their own work too, they're going to turn right around and they're going to blame you. They're going to be in their victim and they're going to say, you're messing this up. Look at what you're doing in this company. Look at what you've done to this situation, which doesn't feel good. And that's the threshold, right? That's the price you have to pay to be authentically who you are. And so it's focusing on, okay, maybe there's this gateway in front of me. Maybe there's a wall I have to go over. Maybe this barrier, this person I have to clear, but look at what's on the other side. And it's like this beautiful opportunity to be truly free and just like let go of all the stuff that no longer serves you and is really holding you back. So, but that could take years if you're trying to navigate that on your own. And that's part of the problem for men too. Part of the challenge for men is we do so much on our own. It's obviously something, which is why you do what you do. And the value of pack hunting stuff and working together as a team and supporting each other emotionally so that you don't have to do it alone. And like, when you build a team of guys who are there for you and they're cheering you on, then it's like, I don't have to focus on that one boss or that one person in my life that I've got to clear, because behind them, I got 10 guys on the other side of the finish line calling me forward, saying, just get over here and we got you. And there's so much value in that. And that's part of what I want to try and tap into with my work too, is like helping people understand that once you build your sport team, you can tackle pretty much anything. So
true. I went through the first transformation like that when I was an educator and I owned a bike shop, and I decided to close the bike shop to gain time with my family. But what I didn't realize was going to happen was that all of my customers and employees, that shook their world. Because it was just out of the blue. Hey, I'm closing the doors. I'm done. This is not the life I want to live. It's taking too much of my time. Well, that completely shook them to the core, which put me in a place where that was where my value was. And I was crushed. And it was like 2 years of depression from that alone, because I tried it alone. The next time I did that is when I left education. I decided to leave education. I had another opportunity that was earning me more money with less hours. So I was able to attend to my kids a little more. And as soon as that happened, same thing. Literally, teachers came up to me, called me stupid, told me it was all going to fall apart. And here I am making double, triple the income they're making, going, I didn't understand, but I had a little more of a base of people to help me. It was still really difficult. Then I created the Brotherhood, and I brought some people into my life. I created the Brotherhood with my my great friend Josh, and Josh was part of my life. And as another business started to arise from my efforts, it was time to leave my career at that point. And that was a year ago. And it was almost easy because I came to it with a different approach. And I also was able to approach my employers like, look, I'm topped out what I can do for you. It is time for your business to grow, and new people will bring new ideas and build on what I built. And so I came into it with this positive energy. And then I had a group of guys behind me saying, yes, this is the right thing for you to do. Way to go. You're following your heart. You're following the plan that's working. And it was beautiful. And so that, like, I've gone through 3 different versions of it. The first 2 sucked. And this last one it was awesome for me. And it was awesome for the business because they grew, because I was able to say, like, hey, I am so confident in what I did that I know right now is the time for me to exit, because and I'll help you set up for success with who comes in next, so they can build on top of what I've done. And then I've done that in my own business, where I stepped away from operations and handed it over to a new person. And then she came in and built a whole new stack of things on top of that. And I think it all has everything to do with the support. With one, I understand who I am. I have an absolute purpose, mission, vision, and my identity is correct. And 2, I have this tribe and I have these people. And it's not just anybody behind you giving you, a pat on the back. It's people who are willing to hold you to the fire as well. Hey, you're better than this, or you're not, what's going on? This is not like you, or, hey, look, I see some places where you need to improve. And that's where building that foundation of really positive people who help you through change is so incredibly important. One of the reasons I scream from the mountaintops that people should have coaches and mentors.
Yep. And I think it's funny because you said you went through those 3 different versions of it. And I think I hear that from a lot of people too. And you have to almost have that first and second experience not go well to get to the third. It's not evident that you can like get that right the first time. It's like you have to almost have the experience of doing it on your own, recognizing, how difficult that was. And then as you open up your heart to wanting to have better experiences going forward, you call in those other people that are going to be supportive of you, and having your tribe. You're right. It's not just about a pat on the back, because anybody can give you a pat on the back. It's the value comes from knowing people and connecting with people that in your heart are going to have your back, even if you fall down the first time or the second time. The support isn't conditional upon your success. The support is there because they see you and they know you and they care about you and they love you, no matter what. That's the kind of stuff that lets people like just completely excel.
Absolutely. And I do believe that it's one of the reasons I do what I do. Is to try and take away. I think everyone's going to have their first experience. Usually got to get hit by a Mack truck before you realize that you're stepping into a dangerous street. But it's just ridiculous. Yeah. But I guess it's just how people operate. But really, what my whole goal is to share enough stories, experience, and opportunities that people can walk through that a little easier. Maybe avoid the second time. Maybe go like, holy crap, this isn't right. How am I going to get it right the next time? And learn and do and have the people in your corner so that it's not as painful and it's a lot quicker. And then you can grow faster. And that's really something I'm really passionate about.
I love that you said that, because like that's exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing in this relationship coaching space. And like you talk about the term relationship coach, and I know like some of it sounds kind of cheesy, and like people want to identify that with like a dating coach or whatever, make it super superficial. And there are people who do really good work in that space, and the ones that are really good at that are doing it for a deeper reason. And so when I talk about what I'm doing and why I'm passionate about this, going back to the beginning of our conversation, I went through this transformative thing in my life, which was a traumatic divorce that completely rearranged my life. And all the good things that have come out of it notwithstanding, like it was the most difficult thing I've ever done. And it brought a lot of pain. And what I can, and I've made a lot of growth from it, but I've done it piece by piece on my own over 4 or 5, coming up on 6 years. And I finally have started to build my tribe, which has been really beautiful. But, there are a lot of people who do the work of, I'm going to support you after your divorce. My thought is like, why don't we get in front of this, right? I can tell you all the mistakes that you're probably making, or the mistakes that have happened, because I made them all. And why not use this as an opportunity to kind of like, stand on the shoulders of giants, right? And like, not that you ever want to be a giant in the post-divorce relationship space, but like, like take so I didn't have to go through that pain, in the sense that it could have been avoided if I knew things that I know now. But since it wasn't, and since I've learned things, let's talk about it so you can see what's coming and get in front of it before you have to learn all of the lessons, right? Let's shorten that time span where you recognize what's going on before it costs you something really powerful, really valuable, like your family, like your relationship, like all the things that divorce can cost. So I totally get what you're saying, and I appreciate that about what you're doing as well.
So I believe that most relationships can be salvaged. I really do. I know that there is a point where sometimes there's drugs, sometimes there's abuse, sometimes there is, cheating that just, it's repetitive. Sometimes it's just the equation's not right. And safety's number one, obviously. And hey, look, I've known men who have been abused by their wives emotionally to the most extreme cases. And like, that's not okay. I mean, like there's points where like, okay, what are my options here? But outside of some of those extremes, do you feel if caught early enough, almost every relationship is salvageable?
Yeah, I think beyond those extremes that you mentioned, I agree absolutely. I mean, people fall in love over a period of time, and it takes people a period of time to fall out of love. Now, it's true that a lot of times, and I'm definitely generalizing, but a lot of times, about the time whichever partner is, mentioning divorce. And let's take my case for example. My wife was the one that told me she didn't want to be married anymore. Like about the time she's sharing that with me, she's already gone through an emotional process where she's
Wow.
kind of reached a decision, but it's also not evident that that decision isn't reversible. There's I will speak to myself. I was pretty clueless about the state of things because I was not embodied emotionally, and I wasn't hearing her. You hear, I don't want to be married to you anymore, loud and clear. Does not mean that there isn't still love there. And it does not mean that under the right circumstances, with the right kind of conditions and the right kind of effort made by both people, that it couldn't be salvageable. I think a lot of cases they are. That those see a lot of guys, especially if you are wounded, and I say wounded in that, a lot of us have trauma, and a lot of us have abandonment and attachment stuff going back. And trauma is a broad term. It doesn't mean that we were necessarily, neglected or abused. It just means that we had experiences in earlier parts of our life that leave us fearful of losing the things that we care about. We're fearful of being alone, maybe fearful of not having people show up for us. So basically, we were talking about the idea that, about the time someone has made the decision to walk away, that's really how they're feeling, but it's not evident that you can't turn things around, and they need to say what they need to say loud and clear for you to hear them. And okay, this is where I was going. So for guys, if you haven't done your inner work and you're not solid in who you are, and you've attached, part of your ability to, so if you, I'll speak for myself. I embodied the label of father and husband. Those were the two most important aspects of who I was. Jarrod, being Jarrod was not more important to me than being a husband, right? And so when you attach so much value to that label, because you don't have the self-love you need to just be good with who you are, when someone says, I want to be married to you anymore, that is a huge threat. That is a threat, because now the thing that identifies you, the thing that gives you meaning and value is about to be gone. And so you go immediately into this complete and total, fight or flight response.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if you are prone to catastrophizing, all or nothing thinking, the kind of things that we deal with when we have anxiety or we have some of our own post-trauma challenges, you can't think of anything else. It's over. It's done. Like, it's 100% done. And you go into this kind of breakdown mode. A lot of us do, where you get angry, you get scared, you lash out. And what you end up doing, unfortunately, is doing the exact kind of things that are going to, push your spouse even farther away. When it's one of my presuppositions is that if someone reaches out to you and says, I don't want to be married to you anymore, it isn't necessarily a done deal. It's them telling you, this is the issue. This is how I'm feeling. I don't want to be married to you anymore. And so if we're embodied and if we want to be leaders in our relationship, let's wind back, and let's say your wife comes to you with a different problem, right? Which is like, I'm feeling lonely, or I'm frustrated by something that happened at work today. We hear this all the time. It's almost become cliche, right? Women don't necessarily need you to fix the problem. They need you to hear them and hold space for them, and show up for them in the way that you, as their husband or partner, know they want you to show up for it. And it's an invitation to remind them, I know you, I see you, I get you, I'm your person, I'm here, and I'm going to do the things that I know you need. And that's evidence of how well I know you and how safe you are in this connection. And so even though it has so much more weight behind it, saying I don't want to be married to you anymore can be kind of the same thing. And it's an opportunity to say, okay, so let me hold space for you. Let me hear you. Let me connect with you and let's figure this out, instead of how do we fix this, or this is all, it's not a death sentence to hear those words. That's really hard to navigate, especially if you don't have a tribe, and especially if you haven't healed some of your own stuff. So part of what I think we're invited to do when we do support people who are trying to rebuild their relationships is to help people recognize, okay, breathe.
Right.
Like there is a way to go forward, and there is a way to salvage this. And it starts with you getting grounded and stable emotionally immediately. Like when I work with people, that's the first thing we talk about is how can you get grounded and how can you get stable? Do you know Jordan Peterson?
Yeah.
So he talks about this in some of his work, which he does a lot of graduate level psychology work, or at least he did when he was a professor. And he talks about the idea of this, we have this mental map, right? So as human beings, you go back to like kind of like early humans, we would build literal geographic maps of our territory, right? And so as you're going through your day, part of the process your brain is doing is you're looking at the world, you're looking at your mental map, right? You're looking at the world, you're looking at your map, you're looking at the world, you're looking at your map. And as long as the map and the world look the same, it's all good. But when the world changes and it doesn't match the map, that's when you've got to worry, because something's different. It could be danger, and so as modern humans, we probably don't have, we do have a geographic map, but really our map is much more sophisticated, and it's a cognitive map of our relationships, of our work, like who we are, like how we relate to other people. And we have this understanding of, all of these aspects of who we are built into this kind of cognitive map. And when you experience a trauma, like the death of someone in your family, or a loss of a job, or a wife who says, I don't want to be married to you anymore, the map changes. Excuse me, the map doesn't change, the world changes, and the world no longer matches the map, and you go instantly into this trauma response. And so unless you have the tools and the techniques to recognize that, that you're activated, that you're triggered, and trust me, the fear I experienced and the pain I experienced and the just complete and total loss of any notion of what to do that I experienced in the days and weeks after that was profound. It's like unlike anything I've ever experienced. And I was like this mental and verbal fire hose, like anyone and everyone I could latch on to. It was like literally the mental experience of like trying to save yourself from drowning, and it's like, I'm just going to literally grab onto anything I can possibly find. And no one in my life really knew how to handle that. And fair enough. But if I'd had someone who could kind of walk me through it, I might have done a little better. So that was a lot of information, but yes, I think most marriages are salvageable. Even at that point when someone says they don't want to be married anymore. But it's taking the right action, and it's getting in the right headspace and recognizing that, it is salvageable. I'm going to stop there.
Well, my wife and I do some work with married couples, and we've had a few, even like last year, I'll say this, the current climate, current situation, the lockdown, that kind of stuff that occurred was what we heard from many couples was either the best thing that ever happened to them because they had to stop and slow down and really reconnect, or it was the worst thing that could happen for them because they didn't know how to connect and they were living parallel lives and now they're forced together all this time. But we had several that came into this saying like, look, we're getting divorced. We're just checking the boxes right now. We're going through this so that we can say we did, or because my wife wants me to, or because my husband wants me to. And at the end, they were reconciled. They're ready to move forward, and their journey was not over. But I've seen it go from both of them saying, no, it's not working. There's no way around it. We're just going through the motions to make it look good, to like a very thriving marriage. It still needs a lot of work. So I've seen it. And so I love asking that question because it really, I think there has a lot to do with how fast can you get help to work on yourself? Because a lot of guys just don't understand. If you want to fix your marriage, fix yourself. Like that is just, that's the equation. It's not that hard.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's the equation for everything. But like you have to start with yourself, because you have to be good no matter what, right? It like all I think most marriages are salvageable, and in the end, you don't have total control over your wife's choices. So you have to first start by doing, put yourself in a position, take the steps and the actions you can, so that you leave yourself with the broadest spectrum of possibilities, right? Like, I'm going to be good. I'm going to be nimble. I'm going to be able to pivot. I'm going to be able to do what I need to do. But you start by grounding yourself. And the reason you do that also is because the next thing you do is you have to then be more available to understand your wife's needs and hear what she needs. And you need to, if you want to save your marriage, be able to show her, especially if she's the one that is wanting to move on and let it go. You have to build a trust again, and need to show her like, hey, I better understand what your needs are, and I'm going to do my part to support you in having your needs met without needing anything in return, because that's a big piece of it. And so when you get your own needs met, and then you can support your partner in getting her needs met, then there's okay, there's some trust here. Okay, maybe something has changed. And then you are in a position to have the conversation of, where do we want to go from here? What do we want this marriage to look like? And really, the whole process of hearing the words, I want to get a divorce, can either be, like you said, the worst thing that could possibly happen, where everything goes to hell and it just blows up in your face, or it can become this beautiful invitation to say, something here isn't working. And gosh, how many of us go into marriages like not understanding, any of the things that would help us have a really successful marriage? Like we get married for lots of different reasons. And at some point, there's that phenomenon of people who, now I'm on a whole bunch of different trains of thought. So some people really struggle, and they have second and third and fourth marriages that just get more and more terrible. But there are some people who really nail it maybe the second time, and it's because they better understand like who they are. They had to go through this initiation of having a marriage end, question themselves, really get clear on who they are, and then they find someone who's done the same thing, and they build something intentional together. Well, if you had the conversation of, I don't want to be married anymore, and you're blessed enough to figure out how to kind of turn it around, you can invite yourselves to have that second marriage within your own first marriage. And you can become intentional about, say, okay, so what we did for the last 5 years or 10 years or 3 years, it wasn't working. Let's have a do-over, right? Let's back up and let's get really clear. We married for lots of different reasons. Let's be really clear on why we're going to stay married, and let's do it in a way that meets both of our needs and helps us create something greater, than the sum of the parts. So,
yeah. And you brought it up earlier, but it's interesting how many people you meet and that have had multiple marriages. And it's so funny because it's almost the same story every time. And what's the only common denominator at that point? It's you, that person. Like, and here's something I want to say. Like, even if you think your marriage isn't salvageable, there is zero to lose in putting it all out there, because even if it isn't savable and you go through that work, you're not doomed to repeat it the second time, because you've done the work and you're going into it a different person. Going into the same person again, guess what? There's a really big likelihood you're going to end up in the same boat.
So, and then you just kind of open the door for some of my own, so I could get spiritual for a second and talk about the idea that we're all invited to do work towards becoming more and more refined versions of who we are, right? And I'm just going to say how I feel, which is like, I've come to understand that the universe kind of gives us opportunities to become better people and grow and find that growing edge and that leading edge. And one of the ways that happens is through a relationship. And so, if you keep meeting the same person in different bodies, there's a lesson there that you're supposed to learn. And when you recognize the only way to get to the next lesson and start to have the outcome I want is to be authentic and really connect with where I'm meant to go. And so, why not put it all out there? Because even if it doesn't work out, you're growing now. You're trying to create the change that you need to experience. And there's a lot of power in that. And that goes back to the authenticity. That goes back to being vulnerable. That goes back to being the wild man. Like, to be authentic and vulnerable. I talk a lot about vulnerability. It was actually one of the first things that I really dove into. There's a lot of, I saw a great post on Instagram one day, something about, women want men to be vulnerable. And someone in the comments posted something like, ew, gross, give me a real man, and the idea was that, being vulnerable is not being a real man. There's weakness in vulnerability. There's so much strength in vulnerability. I'm going to show up and be exactly who I am and speak to you from my heart. That's where a lot of divorce comes from. That's where a lot of, ends of relationships come from, is our inability to be vulnerable and our inability to let the walls down and let someone know us truly. Because until you are willing to be vulnerable, you're not willing, you are not signaling I'm safe, right? Like, because if I show up to you and I've got my battle armor on, and you don't, emotionally speaking, I can do damage and you can't hurt me. So part of, and I'm speaking as a man, part of what I feel like is part of my work as a man in my own relationship, especially with a romantic partner, is to take that armor off and show up vulnerably and say, look, I'm strong enough that I'll show up, I'll take my armor off. You could stab me in the back. You could lay waste to me. That will always be true. But I'm strong enough to handle that, and I will show up that way so you can do the same. And when both people can take the armor off and she can see that I'm safe because he's putting himself in that position of both strength and vulnerability, so we can connect at the heart. You get past all the crap and you can just show up for each other and be honest and truthful. And it's scary. It's scary even now. Even with what I do, it's scary. But that's the invitation to put yourself in that. The great things that you want can't come from playing safe and playing small. And that goes back to career. That goes back to everything. Back to our conversation before about floors and ceilings. It's like you've got to put yourself out there, even in partnership. And if more men were able to do that, there would be less people wanting to walk away because they don't feel safe and they don't feel a connection.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And it's real interesting that there's this perception that vulnerability equals weakness, which I don't think you can be strong to your full ability until you've experienced and practiced and been vulnerable. And that includes inside of your inner circle or your tribe, where it's like, hey man, I'm struggling with this. That allows other men, and this is outside of the relationship, marriage, but that allows other men to help arm you. Like, and you have to remove that before you can get help to build it up. So it goes with both men and women, but I'm telling you, that is an amazing way to connect with a romantic partner, is that getting vulnerable, but also showing strength. So I think there's a fine line there, and you hit the nail on the head. Jarrod, there's so much that men have to learn from you, so much we've uncovered. I'm just going to say, I absolutely love your emotional investment in this and your ability to just be you and share what you share. That tells me that you're an empathetic person, and that you have that ability to really help people through this thing. And that's really what matters. So how can people find you?
So people can find me at my website, which is www.jarroddumas.com. I'm also on Facebook. That's really the best place to find me. I have a page there, Jarrod Dumas Relationship Coach. You can search that on Facebook. And I have a group that I run called Conscious Couples, and it's helping couples stay together. And they can find that in my on my Facebook page and on my personal profile.
That's awesome. And we'll put all that in the show notes. Anything else you want to share before we close out?
No, I just want to share that, there's no reason why we can't keep, I think what I want to share is that we're all invited to be more authentic. I think that's really what it comes down to, is when you're being authentic, you can't really go wrong. There's you talked about the lockdowns and you talked about everything that's changing. There's a beautiful opportunity for all of us to redefine our relationships. And part of that work is around being really clear about who you are and what you want, and then looking for ways to share that with your partner or with the other people in your life authentically and vulnerably, and nothing but good can come out of it.
That's right. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Hey, everybody, before I go, I'm going to make a plea to you. Your rating and subscription to the podcast, if you subscribe, actually rate and even write a review, is really how you can help. And if you've listened to this and you've listened to any other episodes and just even a piece of it speaks to you, just do me a favor. Hey, if you want to leave a bad review, that's fine. I just want people to leave reviews. I want to know how we're doing. And if you're interested in growing the Brotherhood, you can invite people to the Brotherhood of Fatherhood Facebook group, or you can just send them to this podcast. That's really what would help men throughout the world. I know that I have resources. I know that I'm getting in touch with people who have resources through the podcast, and I think people need to hear this. So just go do that. I know it's a lot to ask, but I'm asking you to do it. And if you have a podcast, shoot me at Scott@brotherhoodfatherhood.com. Shoot me your podcast. I'll listen to it and rate and review. I'll absolutely do the return on you. So everybody have a wonderful, wonderful day. And thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Brotherhood of Fatherhood podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, be sure to share it with your friends, your family, and follow us on social media. If you are a father, make sure you join our Facebook group, the Brotherhood of Fatherhood. Hit the subscribe button and tune in next time for more podcasts from the Brotherhood of Fatherhood.